My good friends, spooky season is upon us, and in addition to being a time for scary stories, frightening movies, and wonderful folk traditions, it's also the time of year where perhaps you want to run a horror RPG. Hello everybody, welcome back to Desks and Dorks. I am Kyle, I am the Dork. A couple things. One, like, share, comment, subscribe, all the YouTube stuff helps us out immensely. Two, if you really want to help us out, the single best way to do so, it's how I pay our artists, it's how I pay my editors, it's how I pay everybody, is to purchase our games. Links in the description below to do that. And a huge shout out to the many of you who are now subscribed over the last couple weeks. It has been really awesome to see the number of people that have sort of joined the Desks and Dorks family, which I appreciate. So welcome to the Dad Bod, everybody. Thanks for being here. Huge shout out to Salty Nick from the Desks and Dorks Discord who requested this video. Let's talk about how you are going to run a horror RPG. And one more thing, I have included in the description below a longer video. It's a link to a horror RPG that I ran. It's A Fear Within. It's one of our published games that I ran courtesy of our friends over at Symphony, which is a wonderful place where people play horror RPGs all of the time. They're good friends of mine, and they're great people to support. So without further ado, let's explore how you can make an excellent horror RPG. And if we're going to start somewhere, we need to start by building a strong foundation, and that starts always with safety tools. Now, if you're new to the RPG space, you might think I'm talking about things like hard hats or reflective vests or reflective tape, but no, I'm talking about a system of rules, mechanics, and mechanisms that game masters like myself and many others use to make sure that everyone feels comfortable at their table. There are going to be some people that tell you that safety tools are not essential in role-playing games. I am in the camp where I strongly disagree with that sentiment and with those game masters. If you truly believe that role-playing games are for everybody, and I do, and if you truly want to make your table a more inclusive place and a safer place for everyone, I think you need to start with safety tools. Now, this is doubly true for horror role-playing games. I have played some games without safety tools. For example, I don't always use them with things like Magical Kitty Save the Day. I haven't always used them for After the Rain if I have built up a strong rapport with my table, and I know a lot of folks. But regardless of how well I know people, regardless of my relationship or the experience that I have with them, I run safety tools when I run a horror RPG. And there's a couple reasons why. One, you are going to delve into some really crazy, mature, and in some cases, gruesome topics when you are playing a role-playing game. I have had friends who, oh, by the way, we're going to be talking about a lot of stuff that might be triggering to some people. I am just going to tell you all right now, if you get squeamish about stuff in horror movies or horror in general, this is probably not your episode. Now, moving to the examples, I've had people have a cannibal banquet at one of their role-playing game horror sessions. I have watched someone have to fight an army of possessed orphans during one of their horror role-playing game sessions. You are going to delve into some crazy topics and gruesome topics in horror role-playing games no matter what. The safety tools act like guardrails so that everyone remains comfortable and you can broach those topics with a level of respect both for yourself and for the people you are playing with. It's a really good idea to do that because in order for horror role-playing to be truly successful and impactful, you need complete and total buy-in from the players. We, as game masters, as storytellers, lack a lot of the fundamental tools and luxuries the horror medium often uses to build buy-in and create tension with its audience. We do not have access to special effects. We do not have access to paid actors and prosthetics and Hollywood-level makeup to create our scares. We don't even have the advantage of live editing in order to make certain things feel more impactful and to increase tension. We lack all of that. So how do we build tension? How do we create genuinely good scares? It's by buy-in, by establishing upfront the expectations and the behaviors that you as a game master are willing to both tolerate and encourage at your table. You make it easier for players to buy into the story that you are going to create and the story that they are going to help you shape. This is essential to getting that buy-in, shows a level of respect both between you as the game master and them as the players, and it shows that you care more for them than you do for the game. I know as a player, although I very rarely get to play games anymore when I'm not running or making, I respect and trust a game master that is more in line with safety tools and safety mechanisms than I do one that doesn't have that conversation first. Again, game mastering is the art of making sure that you are telling a strong and impactful collaborative story and it starts with this. You want everybody on an equal playing field first before you get to the spooky, creepy, crawly stuff. Okay? Cool. Now, what are some safety tools? If you're inexperienced in safety tools, you've come to the right place. I recognize, by the way, this feels a little PowerPoint-y. I kind of wanted it to be, because if you want to use these, you can just pause this, take a screenshot, and move on. So I'm just going to go over these very briefly, but again, pause, screenshot, steal, use. The stoplight method. I mentioned my friends over at the Symphony. This is a stoplight method. I stole this from them. I don't know if they created it or not, or if they borrowed it from somebody else. I like this a lot. Any player at any time is allowed to call for a light check. And just like the song that I used to teach to kindergartners, green means go, red, what is it? Oh no, it's a red means stop, green means go, yellow means slow down. Anyway, if it's green, everybody's good. Scene continues as normally. If it's yellow, pause the scene, have a brief conversation, see if everybody's okay, move on from there. And if it's red, stop, end the scene, move on, no questions asked. This is the simplest one. This is the one that I would encourage everyone to have in their games. This is the X card. All you need to make this method work is a piece of paper, a receipt, an index card. You draw an X on it, you put it in the center of the table, and you say, hey guys, if ever we get to a point or a subject that we need to broach and it's super uncomfortable for you, all you've got to do is tap on the X card and we'll move on. No harm, no foul, no questions asked. Again, it's bog standard, it's very simple, but having that lifeline there, particularly if you do not know players very well, is essential to, again, building trust and creating that buy-in, but again, it also increases your players' comfort level with you. They know they've got a lifeline with the X card, and if they know they've got a lifeline, they know they're a little bit more comfortable, then they'll be more willing to take risks with what their characters do and the role-playing they get involved in. Again, somebody hits the X, you just move on. It's just that simple. Last but certainly not least, blinds and veils. This is a very simple discussion that happens before the game. This is a really good thing to do, but essentially you say, hey, are there subjects, ideas, or concepts that you guys have that are lines? A line is a hard line. We don't cross the hard line, right? It's a literal line in the metaphorical sand, or I guess it's a metaphorical line in the metaphorical sand. Whatever, you get me. Essentially, it's a hard line. We don't cross that line. We don't broach that topic. Common ones for people include violence towards children or the elderly. I tend to play a lot of games with a lot of mental health care professionals, and many of them work with childhood trauma in their practices. So they are dealing with kids who are, in some cases, having the worst days of their lives. Then probably that will be the worst day of their life forever. So that's a good example. A veil, on the other hand, is a topic that you might not love, but you're okay if it's broached in a certain way. So to go back to one of my examples, like I said, I work with a lot of mental health care professionals. One of them primarily works with the elderly. So violence towards the elderly is a veil for them. It's not something that they're excited to have happen, and if it does happen in the game, they have a condition that goes along with it. It's the certain circumstances part of having a veil. If someone is violent towards the elderly, they expect either me as the game master or themselves as the player to get an opportunity to give that individual, that NPC, that monster, whatever, what have you, its comeuppance as a result of its actions. But now that we've gone over some ways that you can use these safety tools to be effective and make your table more welcoming for horror RPGs, it's time to talk about how to make them more terrifying. And one of the best ways that you can do that is by turning the mundane into the malignant. If you watch horror movies or if you read horror literature, you'll know that one of the best tricks in a storyteller's book is their way of twisting the mundane, the everyday, the commonplace into something terrifying. And by the way, these tricks, including this one, and especially this one, can be used in any system, whether you're playing Dungeons & Dragons, Call of Cthulhu, Cult, Symbaroum, Facen, After the Rain, Pirate Borg, whatever. But it starts by making the mundane something truly terrifying. But Kyle, I hear you saying to yourself, how do I make the mundane horrifying? Well, it's very easy, in fact. You have to rely on two things, and that's circumstance and repetition. Circumstance, in our context as game masters and storytellers, is the circumstances by which the players encounter an action, an item, an event, right? For example, finding a live fish in a creek, pretty normal. That's not a really scary circumstance. Finding a live fish flapping around someone's chest cavity after you have done an autopsy, That's a little bit bizarre. And repetition, the more often the players are exposed, or at least the few limited times that you expose them to something outside of the ordinary, it makes it a little bit more terrifying. You might wonder what that looks like. I'm going to give you two examples. One in modern pop culture, and one is a way that I would do it in a horror RPG setting. But I really think we should start with pop culture, because what could be more mundane than a smile? If you're a modern horror fan, you have most likely encountered the stills from this movie. Smile, which came out in 2022, is all about a cursed demon-like creature that possesses individuals and causes them to smile and essentially keep walking forward towards somebody. But if I'm doing this in a role-playing game setting, and just to show you how you can turn something pleasant into something really, really scary, let's talk about the pie. I want you to imagine the runniest pie you've ever thought of. You know, the kind where the filling hasn't set quite right yet and starts to soak the tin and sop into every single inch of the pie crust. Imagine that your players are moving through a small village and they encounter peasants gorging themselves on red, runny pie. I want you to describe the sounds they make as they slurp up the red liquid, if they tip the tins back so all of it pours down their throat and down their chins, onto their knees, and then onto the ground. I want you to describe in painstaking detail the flies and gnats that buzz around that liquid as the peasants sort of shovel it into their faces, some of them even scooping the liquid up into their palms like they're trying to get water out of a creek, like they're dying of thirst. When the players use any sort of method to detect magic of any kind, they don't find anything odd with the pies. Now again, you can set this up like it's anything. You can make it so that a witch has cursed the village to be afflicted with an incredible hunger and thirst, and it's only going to be satisfied by eating, devouring, and drinking anything within reach. Maybe that's the scary part. Maybe there is something truly wrong with the pies, but it's not magical. But again, that tiny little example, something mundane like that, with the added benefit of increased description, can do a lot to really, really terrify your players. I know it seems small, but it really does have some big impact. The next thing that I want you to do and focus on is I want you to focus on embracing a general vibe over specifics. What do I mean by that? Now, I don't mean that you should not have any details or any specific advice or stats or, creatures already ready for your role-playing game. What I do mean is that you shouldn't be so worried about those that you forget that the overall vibe of your campaign is far more important. And for that, I wanted to take a little bit of time and look at this fantastic film. This is The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Despite the fact that this movie is almost 100 years old at this point and has very little action, it has stayed in the collective consciousness because it's able to create a vibe. Its use of dark and light, its use of macabre imagery, its use of, shall we say, almost surreal staging creates this very uneasy and unsettling feeling. And I want you to do the same with your game worlds. Here's the thing. There is nothing that you as a game master can create or write that is going to be as terrifying as what a player comes up with on their own. By focusing on a general vibe and by creating an energy in the area that your campaign takes place, you give the players just enough leeway to start creating phantoms and monsters where there are none. And you, as the savvy game master that you are going to be sitting there, listening intently, and thinking about exactly what the players are terrified of, and you're going to be using their ideas and inserting them into the campaign later, thus tailoring your game to the very things the players are actually most afraid of and what they didn't realize that they were feeding you from the get-go. And it's even not that hard to really create a general vibe. We can kind of cheat on this, for example, by doing three very simple things. One, I would focus on weather and lighting. For example, if the players are going to a village in a marsh and everything is damp, you want to add that to your description of the area. If you want to take it one step further, go that extra mile to create that buy-in from your players, add a gameplay mechanic that goes along with this, right? Wind stopping people from using scent or projectiles as a way of fighting, damp weather affecting fire magic or making it harder for the players to light fires or torches. This is really good if you're focused on survival in your role-playing games. I would also focus on making consistent conditions for the area the players take part in. This is really creepy, for example, if everything looks perfect. Imagine going to like a peasant village, for example, where, you look at the thatch roof cottages that are hopefully not going to get burninated by Trogdor the Burninator, but imagine going to those thatch roof cottages and there's not a single piece of thatch that's out of alignment. There's not a single piece of daub or like thing of mud that isn't symmetrical. What that does to somebody. And then have the majority of the NPCs in this area embody a singular emotion: cheer, suspicion, anger, apathy, whatever, because that's going to really stand out for the players. Imagine you go, into the marshes, you think it's going to be one thing, and you find a village where everything is completely and totally beautiful. There's not a single blade of grass or a single piece of straw out of place, and all of the villagers are really, really cheerful. And then, because we love some contrast and contradiction in our stories, give them a singular NPC that does not have that kind of emotion. It lets you draw attention to players, or to non-player characters, I should say, that you really want the players to interact with. But last, and certainly not least, you as the game master should make the safe into the unsafe. I got this idea after I watched a video essay on the importance of haunted houses and monsters under the bed. The video essay posited something that I found rather interesting. It said that these stories were very terrifying and stayed in the collective consciousness of humans because psychologically and sociologically, our beds, our bedrooms, and our houses themselves are the areas where we let our guard down. It is where we feel the most safe, and as a result, it is these kinds of stories that sort of violate that psychological safety, and because of that, are much more terrifying. You can do this in your games, and I'm going to show you exactly how. Consider for a moment a druid type character, somebody who relies on animal companions to get the job done. Maybe they summon a lot of animals, maybe over the course of a game they have made alliances with the woodland creatures and they like to transform into an animal very often. What happens when your players are called to a remote area on the frontiers of the kingdom to fight a plague that is making the animals go berserk? What happens when the druid's friends start turning into bloodthirsty adversaries? What is the party going to do when the druid themselves becomes infected with the disease and is not only a risk to themselves, but a threat to their life? By making the techniques that your players are most fond of using and turning them into opportunities for drama and danger, that's going to create the most tension. Psychologically, your players, when they find a pocket of gameplay that they rely on, it's almost like a safe space. It's a safety net. It's something that they know they will fall back on. And so the first time that you as a game master take that weapon and tweak it so that the players are in danger if they use it, is going to be a big thing. We've talked about this before on the channel, but I like to call this ludonarrative resonance, right? And that's where the gameplay lines up with the feeling that the story is trying to create. In this way, the player, who, whether they know it or not, has formed a connection to a technique or a rule set or something that they do that they really like, something they do that makes them, feel safe, when that becomes twisted on its head, that's when you're going to watch the players have real terror. One word of caution, however, this should not be overused. The last thing that you want is for the players to feel like you are checking them at every single opportunity. There is a fine line between terror and frustration, and as game masters, it's our responsibility to walk that tightrope successfully. I'll give you one more way that you can sort of turn a player's advantage to their disadvantage. So, consider for a moment you are playing a game where a player has an incredible amount of stealth. They love to strike from the shadows. Darkness is their friend, and it's something that shields them and protects them both from prying eyes and allows them to set up opportunities where they can ambush, steal, and in some cases, even enact some good old-fashioned unaliving. What happens when the shadows themselves become the very monster that threatens them. And those, my friends, are some ways that you can GM some successful horror role-playing games. Now, before I go, before we decide to part ways, I thought I would leave you with some of my favorite horror RPGs that you can play this spooky season. I think you'll really enjoy them. We're going to start off with Cult Divinity Lost. This is one of my absolute favorite games. This is a sumptuous, dark role-playing game that gets into some heady topics. Again, this is the game that makes me want to encourage you to use those safety tools, people. It's really, really good. I also happened to play this with a lot of close friends of mine. That was my first time playing it, and yeah, it introduced me to some people who I would still consider friends even now, after that game has been long since finished. You Have Always Lived in the Lighthouse. Full disclosure, this is our game. This is a Desks and Dorks published title, but it has been doing really well. If you're in the market for a two-player centered horror game, I actually don't think you can get much better than this one, and I know that I am biased in saying that, but let's be real, I've got to show for myself at least once every now and again. You can also, however, play my all-time favorite horror game. I don't think there is a single one that I like better than this one. Dread is the best. I absolutely love Dread. If you have not had a chance to play Dread, it is the best example of ludonarrative resonance. The connection between gameplay and between terror is just the best. It is one of my favorite games of all time, and it is definitely my favorite horror role-playing game. 100% a slam dunk. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful game. You can, of course, play Pirate Borg. I have thalassophobia. I do not like big sea monsters. This game is gritty, it's dark, it's sumptuously painted and just laid out. I love it. Also helps that I know some of the team members behind Pirate Borg. Wonderful, wonderful folks, and a really, really great game to boot. We have 11th Beast from our friends over at Accent Press, another wonderful small-time indie developer that I actually know personally, but it's a solo role-playing game about hunting down a demonic creature basically in the city of London, the bowels of London during the turn of the century. Really interesting, love the mechanic, and it's a wonderful little production for a very reasonable cost. Cannot say enough good things about 11th Beast. And now, last but certainly not least, we have Gravemire by Sylvan Lawrence. This was actually recommended to me by my friend Nick over at IPR. Shout out to Indie Press Revolution, of course. This is a absolutely fantastic bayou-centric horror game that has you traipsing through a swamp that wants you dead just as much as the creatures that live within it, and the swamp is just continuing to expand. It really does focus on some existential dread and the terrors of a world that is totally and completely alien and hostile to you, even though you haven't really left Earth. It's absolutely spectacular. The vibes on this are immaculate, and I think if you are somebody like me that like Hunt Showdown or the Scooby-Doo versus those zombies videos that absolutely traumatized me as a child, then it's 1000% a really strong recommendation. But those are the ones I'm going to leave you with. Again, thank you to everybody who stuck around to the end of the video. Thank you all so much. Again, a like, a share, a comment, a subscribe. All that stuff goes a huge way to helping us out. You can purchase any of our games and the links in the description below if you want to see me run a horror RPG, so you can see me put into practice some of the stuff that we talked about. The link is also in the description below. But until next time, I'm Kyle Ott for Desks and Dorks. You have been absolutely amazing. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.